So welcome to today's social system mapping deep dive session for September 19th, 2022. Maura found that fun. Your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, co-founder of Sum Mapping Greater Than the Sum, and Kara Martner, my sort of partner in, I don't know if saying partner in crime is like a bad thing to say, but she's my partner in the things we get up to and is pretty much the other, like I make messes and Tim cleans them up and Kara cleans them up. There I have two people following behind cleaning up my messes. And so what this is, for those of you who are new, who haven't joined us before, basically this is a vision about a possibility, the possibility being that this kind of mapping that we practice called social system mapping can help groups of people who generally call themselves something like a network or something like a community and have something like an intention, some kind of change that they're trying to create in the world or for themselves, that social system mapping can help them be more impactful and to be more self-organizing more quickly than they would otherwise be. It's also a learning opportunity, and that learning goes both ways, both us who are social system mappers sharing social system mapping learning with other people in the community, but also learning from the community about the needs of the community. You all have lots of experience with social processes that are generative and social change and co-creation and collaboration. So all of those things are, it's a multilateral shared learning that is going in many directions. It's a community practice, so there's we're not just learning, but we're also practicing together and sharing our practice, and we're also sort of developing the field of social system mapping, which is necessarily informed by a lot of different perspectives. This isn't just, the technical stuff of making a map. This is about how do we envision, how do we use a map as part of the envisioning of what we can be together as a community or a network? How do we use a map to make sense of the work we're trying to do, the ways we fit together, the systems that we're part of, how to influence those systems to be more generative. So it's also a community of field building, a community of practice and field building, basically. So today's agenda is, today we're going to be fairly open-ended. I had a plan for today that I switched. Well, I needed to prepare for it last week, and I was just like sort of overwhelmed and had a lot going on, and decided I didn't have time to do the subject that needed more preparation. And I was talking with Tom, who's with us in the meeting today. I was talking with Tom last week, and he was thinking about how to get started developing a survey and like just getting started mapping. And I also had a conversation with a client last week about the same topic. And I just kind of decided, okay, I've been meaning to circle back to survey development for a while. Mary and Jim and I had a rough draft of a survey development document, and recently, shared with Mary and Jim, and they gave some input. So anyway, I thought, okay, let's just do survey development, but I don't have a super big plan for how to do that. I have some things I can share, but I want to start with your questions in just a moment. But so today's agenda, pretty much open-ended, loose. And then for those of you who aren't familiar with our standard practice, we usually have whatever the session is, whatever our deep on-ramp and deep dive sessions are, they're designed to last an hour. So the formal, even though today's informal, the formal piece lasts an hour. And then at the top of the hour, anybody who needs to jump off can go ahead and jump off. And then we stick around, I stick around, and generally some others do too, for an extra half hour of just open-ended questions, taking the discussion wherever works for whomever wants to stick around. So you're welcome to do that with us. So that's the agenda, pretty simple. And I know we just had Antonio, welcome. And if you would like to unmute and just make sure your mic works, feel free to. I'll pause a moment, let's see if that wants to happen.
Hola, hola, how are you?
Welcome, good, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go to, glad you could join us, Antonio. We were just sort of shifting from one little piece to another. So let's go to our chat intros, or go to chat and do some introductions there. And yeah, let's do it that way. And so first I want to just ask you to put in your name, your pronoun, your location. And I didn't write this down on the, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, on the presentation screen, but also a network that you're working with or part of or thinking about in relation to mapping. And welcome, Brian. You also popped in while I was yapping. Ah, Maura, cool. Maura teaches community design and is now feeling video ready. Tom is in Richmond, Antonio in Veracruz, Metropolitan Formazione. I'm thinking that means some kind of community structure thing for agriculture. Mary Roscoe for the social system mapping and nature movement, and Jim in California, relational coordination. Cool. Okay. So another thing I'd like to see in the chat, let me, I'm going to type it. I should have. What are your biggest survey design questions that you have or challenges that you face related to social system mapping SumMap surveys? So this is the foundation of your map. The questions you ask will give you the map that you will have. So the questions, that behooves us to ask wise questions in the survey. And if you have never done a social system map, then you probably have questions about the process, or maybe you don't. And if you don't, that's fine too.
What was your question again?
Yes, biggest survey design questions you have or challenges you face.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you actually to go. Let's go through the chat. So I'm going to just go in order of the responses to the challenge. So Maura, I'm going to start with you. If that's okay. Am I saying your name right, Maura?
Yes.
Can you just say a little bit more about your comment there?
Yeah, so my comment is that my biggest barrier is gaining access by neighbors or participants or community leaders to a survey process. There tend to be such a usual suspects list that folks access over and over and over again. And this is for good reason, because those are trusting relationships that people have and understand. But I find that that's too limited and doesn't do right by the whole intent of the network process, which is to be much more open and inclusive. But the level of skepticism and the level of distrust really puts the folks who have the established relationships that are the sort of usual suspects in a tight spot, because then they become the bridge, which isn't fair to them. So I'm just finding that there are a lot of social structural issues that prevent the kind of representation that I know everyone is seeking.
So just so I understand, I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly. It's the list gatekeepers don't want to share it with you because it's their trusted list and they don't have permission to share it, or it's that the list is too constrained and it's not inclusive enough.
Correct. Yeah.
Both of them, or one of, or
it's more that the latter, that we tend to resample. I think as a sector, we tend to resample folks who understand and have trusted relationships, but those are not representative or comprehensive enough.
Got it. Yeah. I hear this. I had one client who had a number of people who kept saying to me, "We already know everybody. Why are we doing this?" We already know everybody. I'd be like, I don't think so. When I look at your map, I see all kinds of groups of people that aren't, I just don't think you are. But anyway.
But you might know those folks that you've talked to over and over again, is my point. So people have this illusion of knowing the community.
Exactly.
It's only a fraction of the community.
They believe They're saying they believe they know everybody. And they don't need to know anybody else because they know everybody they feel like they need to know. So what's the point? I get that. Okay. So and then Tom. No, I'm sorry. I was going to do this in order. Maura, Jim, do you want to say a little bit?
Yeah, just sort of piggybacking on what you said, Maura. I'm thinking initial demo with a core group of people that are sort of on board, but then moving out from that to the full community. So the people on board you can almost talk to and say, this is what we want to see in the map, and you can go ahead and build out an initial map. But now the next step is, how do you either anticipate what the rest of the community is going to feel engaged by, or you have to create a process where you engage them and then decide what's going to go in the map. And it's just a little chicken and eggy there. But I think, getting a core initial map that's attractive enough in itself, and the relation and the folks that are on the map being able to talk about that to their constituencies and say this is exciting and model it, is hard sometimes for me.
Thanks, Jim. Tom, did you want to amplify a little bit what you put in the chat?
Yeah, for my work, we're kind of introducing the social system map concept to people who've never really seen anything like it. They like what they see, but don't necessarily understand it. And so we have the opportunity to sort of introduce it. And in my talking to them, the things I was thinking that they most care about, that the map could be most helpful about, are these things about unity within, because we connect churches and other related organizations, nonprofits. And they've been doing good work for a long time, but they know they're not actually changing anything. So they believe unity and higher levels of commitment and cooperation are the pathway through. So getting those questions right at the beginning, I think, would be helpful.
Great, thanks. Brian, do you want to amplify?
Yeah, so from my point of view is that a lot of change efforts approach it as an enterprise, as a business purpose that we need to fulfill. And to get momentum going first, just assume everybody's going to follow along first before doing getting people all together on the same page. Getting people all together on the same page is almost seen as a distraction, because you're not really focused on making the change. You're focused on, and it just doesn't work. You never get enough momentum behind you in order to make it work. So I find that to be a difficulty.
Mary, do you want to play?
I guess a lot of change really has to do with relationships, which is, what this is all about. And looking back, it seems like we're sort of blind to what really works in terms of relationships. It's not visible. So beyond connections, I'm sort of wondering what's invisible that we can make more visible in terms of questions. And then the second is we've been in other community of practice sessions talking about the ladder of inference. And so that has brought, the first step is what data you're selecting. And that's making me question or think about, in terms of surveys, what data we're selecting. So it could be a little connected to what Maura is bringing to not only the same people, but we're asking the same survey questions, and what data would be more helpful in terms of change that we're not looking at or overlooking.
Thanks. Antonio, would you like to amplify, say some more about your comment?
Yes, right now I'm having trouble understanding and defining the connection options and the like how they appear afterwards in the map.
How to display them in the map, or because you're saying in Spanish, is there how does it relate to language, the question you have, or to Spanish in Kumu?
I don't know, because for me, it was not the same kind of relationship definitions, connection options. When I was thinking about how we are relating and how we want to relate in our network. And so I don't know how that changes or how that translates into the mapping.
Oh, okay. So if to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, are you saying that you need to know how to change the connection questions in the SumApp survey so that you can express them both in Spanish, but also express them in a way that's culturally appropriate for your context?
I think so, yes.
Okay, okay. So I'm thinking this is a technical question, and I'm thinking if everyone's okay with it, I want to do a couple things. One is I want to get Antonio's question handled so that if it's a technical question, and I won't know if it's not a technical question unless I show him the technical solution. And then if he says, no, that's not it, then we'll know that I'm totally barking up the wrong tree, but it will only take a couple minutes for me to answer Antonio's question if it's what I think it is. So while I'm talking here, I'm also logging into SumApp so I can go there and just show it. But then what I was thinking of after doing that was maybe someone who's used to listening for themes for same and different could just say the themes that you're hearing, that you heard from these questions, and we could sort of list, come up with a couple of the main themes that were in the chat, and then we can talk about them together. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what I was thinking to do with this, and now I'm trying to log in, and it's going to take me a minute because anyway, or if I'm just, as I said, this is informal and I'm kind of winging it. So I'm just thinking if someone has a better idea of what to do with those comments you guys just did, I would let you facilitate and take that on if you would like for 20 minutes. How about
20 minutes?
Yeah, do you want to
I thought you were going to like 2 minutes until you got to Antonio's.
No, I'm going to do Antonio's, and then assuming that will be done by bottom of the hour, if someone else would like to facilitate the best conversation we can have with those particular questions that came up, I will gladly surrender to that. But if you don't feel like, yes, I've got it, I want to run with this, then
well, I would be happy to.
Okay.
But Mary, did you want to jump in?
No, I'm just writing a few notes, but not on the level of.
Well,
so, but first, let me. No,
oh, you wanted to?
I want to do Antonio's question first, and then I'm going to hand it over to you for 20 minutes, and then you'll give it back to me, and I'll share a couple things that I've been working that have just sort of resources. But so Antonio, this. I'm hoping this is helpful for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a tier 4 account. So you may only have one of these questions in yours, but if you just click on the question, and these are connection questions, you can just go right here to this little pencil and change it. So first, just figure out what the list is, and then put it in there in whatever language works for you. Does that answer the question, or am I totally off base?
For example, if I don't know that person, should the people do not respond, or should there be an option?
Got it.
How do I make that, like in the Kumu app? It's non-existent. I don't know.
It's in the Sum app. Yes, it should be non-existent. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So
if you don't know the people, you just don't answer.
There's 2 ways to do that. One is, yes, you don't want to make everyone in the network feel like they have to go in and comment on everyone in the network when they don't even know them. That just makes more work for them. That isn't telling you anything that you can't already learn by just not having them say anything, because it's implicit that a no is a no. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The other reason not to ask them is because then every single pair in the network ends up having a connection, and a big percentage of those connections are I don't know that person, which is meaningless. So having all those extra lines on the map actually makes a lot of visual noise that isn't meaningful. There is an exception to that, which is when sometimes people will ask like the first level. So usually that first question, you make it a ranking question. So it goes, from a weak tie to a stronger tie. And you only have them answer one, so that you can sort of get a sense of weak and strong ties, however you want to articulate that. But sometimes people will also in that list add a question, the weakest tie is, I would like to get to know this person, or I would like to collaborate with this person. So that's the exception to that. If they don't know each other, that adds a little bit of complexity. I think it works better if you're in a tier 3 or 4 account. I think that works better as a separate question, because I may know that person, but not have collaborated with them, and I may want to collaborate with them. So it implies no relationship going to and saying, I mean, it doesn't tell you about the existing relationship. It tells you about an intention, but without knowing where it's starting from. So depending on your account, either put it in with the initial ranking questions, or I would separate that out if I have that technical option and make it a separate question where I say, you know, first, how well do you know this person? And second, what would you, you know, like a question of, you know, I would like to get to know them better. I would like to get to know them. I would like to get to know them better. I would like to work with them more.
So that would be for a separate question.
If you have that option in your account, yes, I would put that separate.
What about these ranking that you have there that is called generative interactions? What would you say that is like? What do you mean by generative?
Yeah, so that's a sort of a different, this is the classic social network analysis questions that sort of came from June Hawley, where, you know, I know this person, I've talked with this person, I've worked with this person, and generative, well, anyway, this is just a sort of another take on that. And generative interaction then is actually sort of subjective. It's kind of up to the person who's answering the question. If they feel like, you know, it's more than an acquaintance, and we, you know, we maybe don't work together or haven't collaborated on projects together, but we help each other become more in some way. That's kind of what that means. But, you know, so all of these questions are subjective. And so we're just sort of looking for a general category that tells us, you know, this is weak, this is, you know, like an increasing bunch of strongerness in whatever way will seem to speak to your community. So, you know, in communities where we talk about generativity or, you know, regeneration or that kind of stuff, generative interaction is a good phrase. But there are communities where people won't, you know, even be familiar with that word, let alone what it might mean in a relationship. So in that context, you kind of don't want to, you want to just use what seems meaningful and discernible, you know, so that people aren't too confused about when, you know, what step they might say. But yeah, does that help?
Yes, it helps. Thank you.
And did we address the question, your core question that you put into the chat?
Yes, yeah. I mean, one of the questions had to do with how can I like manipulate Kumu, but I guess it's not necessary at this point. Okay.
And are you in our Slack team? Are you familiar with Slack? Are you able to work in Slack?
I've used it once, but I'm not in the Slack team.
Okay. Well, if you if you're willing and able to join our Slack team, when you get to the Kumu part, you can just, because Slack is for, you know, basic, you know, technical questions that don't require a whole lot of conversation and thinking, but are things just like, how do I do this? You throw that in our Slack team, and we'll respond pretty quickly and give you the code, or, you know, give you the examples. So Kara put a link to the Slack team in the chat, and if you that's a really easy way. I mean, that's probably the way you will get, you know, spend the least amount of time and get an answer as quickly as possible around things like, how do I put the connections in Kumu?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, please feel free and welcome to question us there, and we'll yeah, I want to help make sure that you get what you need so that your map can be successful. So
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, it looks like we just lost Maura. I don't know if that was she's coming back.
No, excuse me. She messaged me that she just needed to jump off, but
Okay.
she'll follow up separately.
Okay. Okay. So, Jim, I don't know if that changes your plans, but you've got 20 minutes and Jim, you have 20 minutes and I am stepping back.
Okay. So I think we've got a good start here. What I was seeing in the chat from that initial was I was looking for what are the questions after the first quick round with small number of people. Maura was looking at how do we get to that next round of people. And then the other themes I saw in there were getting to purpose. Tom was talking about like, how do we get unified purpose there? And Brian was talking about the same kind of thing. And Mary also had like, what are the questions that will make the invisible visible? So anyway, the thing that I was thinking about there is like, we all have maps in mind. If we start with the question, why map? What's your purpose for having the map? Either you're coming in to an organization, you're going like, oh, I've got this great idea. I think a map would do, or an organization, a community has pulled you and has said, we think a map would be really great. But so getting to that right at the beginning. So question for everybody into the chat is just in the network that you're thinking about, what's your initial take about either why people are asking to map or why you think or anticipate that mapping would be of value for this community? And let's just sort of start with that in the chat.
Can you say that question again?
So I'll put it in the chat.
Thank
I mean,
you.
basically it's basically why map? What do you think is the value of mapping in your community, in the community that you're trying to provide value to?
And Brian had his hand up.
Yeah, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
The reason why I think map is important is because it's a means of taking things from fine-grained information to coarse-grained information, which is a lot easier to absorb, especially if you got a whole plethora of ideas out there and you're trying to just kind of like you're trying to see the forest and stop seeing the trees. And so a map makes that a lot easier to do.
You want to put that in the chat and we'll just have it.
It's funny you say that because I think our networks are having the exact opposite problem. They're real clear on the fine grain, but don't see the bigger picture.
Those are, if you. Why don't you drop that in the chat too, if you would, Tom? We'll have a. Okay. So it seems like a theme that's coming out of this is, I mean, visibility about the basic quality that a map provides, either the larger view or seeing past the horizon that's available to individuals, or to mine more richness about what are people's intentions, what are people's connections, what are their interests, what are our commonalities. Yeah, Antonio's in the same space there.
Mm-hmm.
Related
Mary.
to what Antonio wrote, there's one consultant who uses a survey as a base thing to show who knows each other, sort of what the territory is. And then it also provides a picture of the base in terms of the growth moving forward in the picture, in the development.
So seeing change over time.
Right, but creating a survey to just sort of know what the territory is and who's working together, who isn't, and starting from there.
And my comment seems like an outlier. It was a very specific sort of thing of connecting the periphery together, that the purpose was in a core periphery conversation is start connecting the periphery to itself instead of the center. Okay, well, those are fairly generic purposes that bring value of having any map whatsoever. Is there, I guess, a second question that I would ask, because now we're starting to get, if you start to generate that purpose, you start to think, well, what questions would allow that purpose to materialize? Digging one step deeper and then just sort of open conversation about this. When people start to see themselves embedded in these patterns and in the larger space, the terrain, as Mary says, what does that enable? What will happen towards your goal, your design goal, if that starts to occur?
Is that a
question? In other words, what change do you expect to see, or do you hope to see, as a result of getting more visibility, people seeing themselves embedded in the terrain, starting to understand interests and so forth?
Did you want that in the chat, or did you want it verbally?
No, I think we're small enough here to.
I want to share a comment that I got last week from someone who's in our community, who's also a client, a new client of mine. And she was saying, Christine, I think of you as my teacher in this, and you're my guide in this. And I come to you, and you're who I go to when I have questions. And I come to these community of practice sessions. And she said, and I really have never until just now thought, I don't show up and see the other people at the community of practice sessions. I don't think of them as potential resources for me. And I don't think of myself as a potential resource for them. But I'm seeing now that that's, like a mind shift that I need to make, if I'm going to do this mapping with she's seeing that her own mind shift. And also that's the mind shift she wants to put in, to generate in her community, is how do we see each other, ourselves and one another, as potential resources for one another, and quit leaning on me so much in this particular context. But, in other contexts, it's like maybe starting to have anything to lean on, like where there isn't a core person you're leaning on, or, just, and how to just spread those support exchanges more widely. And I think like just having that mindset is a key piece of what we're trying to instill.
The phrase I remember from the Occupy Wall Street, the networks around that, and the Sandy hurricane, the networks, is that we all have resources. And I think it's similar to what you're saying, being able to see that.
So from an individual point of view, it's giving each individual more degrees of freedom on both ways, but both being a resource and having resources. And from a bottom-up point of view, that makes a lot more pathways possible. The trick would be choosing which pathway is the right one for the community, but at least you're not getting stuck in one pathway and, you know, just doing the same thing over and over again. You can evolve to find better pathways.
I guess we've been thinking too about questions that give a richer picture of the people or organization in terms of resources, of not asking only the questions, sort of the usual questions that have to do with resource, but moving out from that to a more whole picture of individuals and I guess you could probably say as organizations or networks too, of a wholer picture.
I think some of my users are super interested in convening new conversations or grabbing 2 or 3 people and take them to lunch or something that don't know each other, but through the use of the map, maybe see a connection that would just be impossible to see. Mm-hmm. Because they're super well connected people, but they run out of brain matter at some point of remembering who does what to who cares about what. Mm-hmm. They see that as a very useful objective of the work.
Tom, can I push that one step further? So if they saw that connection, what would you hope for them? What would come of that?
They literally would search their own Rolodex or database or the map. And they're the kind of people that would just pick up a phone and go, you don't know, I'm going to buy you and him lunch. What's a good day?
Yeah.
And then sort of get out of the way. Right. I mean, very practically like that. That's all these people are tremendously strong connectors. They just need more tools to advance their own work.
So that seems like a really clear path, you know, to pick up the phone and make that thing happen. And now there's an activity that was never there before, which is starting to build something around their purpose.
Right.
That seems like the really a perfect connection from this map
Yeah,
thing to changes in the field itself.
Right.
Are there other examples of that for folks?
Well, I was just thinking on Tom's question of, or the picking up the phone, I was thinking, oh, maybe that could be a connection question. Like, I'm going to pick up the phone and call this person, or I wish this person would pick up the phone and call me, or, you know, rather than I would like to work with this person. That's kind of a, you know, a really fuzzy, like you know, but like I was just thinking about actually having a connection question where you could articulate a commitment or an intent that is a thing you will do, or yeah. So I was just sort of starting to play with that in the connection question category. Thinking about that.
I'm thinking about the possibility, in your case, of a convening where you bring like a panel of different people together. So it's sort of a creative process in terms of not the usual people, but people who are involved in maybe what you would think of periphery sort of work or whatever. And that really energizes people, I know, of sort of a meeting or a convening that's really different from the usual.
I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum and realization. The truth is, I'm not actually all that social. Okay, I mean, I do this as an intellectual exercise in conceptual, and I can work it out in my head. But truthfully, I've got limited sociability, and as far as I don't really want 1,000 people being connected to me. So there's that too I have to consider.
And even people who are good connectors, like some of the biggest resistance to maps that I've come across is like the super connected people who need gatekeepers and they don't want more people coming at them. And so all of these are tensions that exist in a map. And Brian, then that also connects to, things you've talked about the Dunbar number. Like if we have a limit to how much connection we can maintain, then wouldn't it be great to be strategic about that and to not just be spending time building random relationships around things that you just know you're not going to, they're just going to take a lot more energy to turn into something that can be generative for both of you than to be sort of picking your connections wisely.
But that's energy to establish it, not necessarily energy to maintain it.
Or maybe it'll take a lot of energy to establish it, but it would be strategic and wise to do so, such as across differences or across, places where you really have a lot to learn from each other. That takes more work, but there's still a reason that you're choosing that. It's still not just random. If you have a map, you can have a little more choice about it. It's just all I'm thinking.
It makes me think of, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Just wondering if that's like a potential status. I mean, you can almost see it on a map, right? If somebody's super connected, you're like, they probably not gonna have time, like Christine on this map, right? But it almost can be like a status. It's like, hey, I'm overloaded. Find somebody like me. Not that untactful, but that's the message.
Another situation that I've seen is in a survey that people said they wanted to be connected to Outdoor Afro because they were interested in more diversity. If you look at that from the standpoint of Outdoor Afro, they have all these people wanting to be connected to them so that they can show that they're, or as a gateway to more diversity. That's a little overwhelming. I think in the example I'm thinking of, there were 17 people that said they wanted to be connected, which is a lot for a small developing organization, and a little strange. Yeah, it was a strange situation in a way.
I'm just trying to I just wanted to throw in one last comment.
Yep.
I was trying to visualize what would be the facilitated sense making. I'm not sure sense making is the right word, but what's the mechanism outside of the map where you're using the map to enable people to engage in the way they want to engage. So if it's to increase the number of connections that people build, triad connections. Some people do it naturally, some people don't. So how do you encourage those people to do it more? How do you make visible the fact that people need to be kept? How do you make visible what was Brian saying? Anyway, I'm just trying to think about what is the social process that you bolt onto the map that enables all these desires that goals that you have all just articulated. Is there one process, or is there different processes for different type of people? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But the map does not do it by itself, right? There's this thing you have to build and facilitate that bolts onto it that's associated with purpose or purposes.
But I don't know if you're really bolted it onto the map, or rather the map becomes a lens or becomes a conduit by which it's done. Because I think it's really hard to do it without having some mechanism. Maybe it's not a map, but something has to be a linchpin or a focal point to bring all that together. And having the map be the instrument people do that if they understand how.
Yeah, but the map doesn't do it by itself.
Yeah,
exactly. It needs to be. I mean, hammered with somebody who's never done carpentry doesn't make any difference. But once you know what carpentry is, you understand how to use it.
Yeah. So I was going to say, okay, so let's wrap up Jim's time. Jim, is there anything you wanted to just for your facilitation, your 20 minutes that I impromptu dumped on you without, I offered and you jumped in, but is there any summary or wrap up or framing that you feel like you want to do before we move to my little, what I was hoping was 10 minutes, but it'll be less?
No, I don't think so. I think the conversation was full in there. So I learned a lot. Thanks.
Good. And then I just wanted to see if anybody, so this was an experiment. I'm working on being less hubby. It may not like husbandy, but like less of a hub. And so that just popped into my head, like to have somebody else facilitate. So I just wanted, anybody has any quick comments, either for me or Jim, about the experiment itself. And I'm saying that because another practice that I'm wanting us to do more of is to just reflect more, to pause and ask for reflection and feedback more. And so if there's anything anybody would like to say about this little experiment of me impromptu asking for a facilitator help.
Well, I think the opening for a more informal conversation brought more use questions, real life situations that were useful to think about, or sort of combine, more community of practice, generative thinking with on the ground sort of work.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if this approach helped with the core questions that people showed up with. You could just give a 1 to 5 visual, like 1 is like didn't help at all. Antonio, I don't know if you could put your fingers in the chat, or if you're there. Okay, so it seems like it was pretty successful, generally speaking. I'm going to there were a couple things I wanted to quickly, a couple resources that Kara will put in the chat. One of which is simply the survey design document that I started years ago. Somebody needed a survey design, like they were like, what are we asking? And I threw this together and sometimes go back to it over the years, but I've put it into our community of practice portal, and so that you could use. It's just got some summary kinds of questions that that you could think about. Okay, thank you, Antonio. I see three thumbs up-ish. Great. So that's good feedback for Jim and for me. So there's a survey design question document that Kara just shared. And then I wanted to quickly share with you a process that, and I'm going to share my screen. Kara is also going to give you a link to this. It's a Miro board. And I wanted to, so this is what one client of mine recently did. So she and I talked a lot. I was mostly a thought partner, and then she sort of would jump in and design the process with her community. She had like a pretty robust group of what she called allies whose job was to help design the survey and help, sort of be an ally to the overall mapping process. And her first step was actually to do a survey period of this. Took 2 or 3 convening sessions. The network, the mission, purpose, et cetera, were up here. And then there was a detailed project plan about how we were going to make the map. I presented a map. And then we did some brainstorming around what the vision of community would be for that network. People just sort of automatically started putting their little thumbs up and their little hundreds. So that was really fun. There were a lot of people moving stuff around. This frame was about the connection questions. So how do we need to relate to each other? And so we did these, and there are a couple of other, the other one I wanted to point out, this was really useful. I don't think I would have thought of it the way she presented it, but she actually, after we presented the map and we did all these, the various questions about what do we want to know about each other and what are we hoping people will, these interactions will be like, then she wanted people to actually brainstorm about the potential for the social system map, which I thought was really, really a great thing, because usually what we're doing is we're telling people what it's going to do, what the potential is, but actually getting them to think about it before we had it, got their brains engaged and got their words into it, and got, it just generated a kind of curiosity and a kind of, a kind of engagement and sense of design that was very generative, I think. So this is just one way of, I wanted to just share this with you, of getting at those questions without, the big hassle with creating a survey is, 5 hours of wordsmithing on the first 3 questions, which just drives everybody nuts. And so starting with a survey, a draft survey, can be really time consuming, but starting with brainstorming, and then from there, she took all of these things and sort of distilled them into the kinds of questions. And then after having done that, gave people the opportunity to asynchronously comment on the survey draft. So that was a process that I thought was pretty generative. I wanted to share that with you. I've anonymized it, so you can't tell what network this is or who did any of these things, but as an example to work with. And I see we're a minute over. So let's do our goodbye ritual. And if you want to stick around for the next half hour and be more informal and ask questions and comment, that's great. But if you need to jump off, let's do our goodbye ritual, and all unmute. I'm going to count down and then we'll say goodbye. 3, 2, 1. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
You have a wonderful week.
Just have a wonderful, yep. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. And okay, we lost Brian.
A question for Jim, if he has a minute.
Yeah.
Are you sticking around, Jim?
Yeah.
As long, okay. Go ahead.
You sent out the liberating structures link.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is new to me, so I'm just kind of curious as to what brought that to mind.
Oh, it's part of a community of practitioners that use these 30 liberating structures, which have a basic pattern language underneath them about getting every voice heard, harvesting the intelligence in the room, doing it very quickly, moving from individual reflection to reflection with small dyads and triads, and then harvesting for general sense of what's going on in all these parallel conversations. And there's all different, and the impromptu networking is just one of those, which is a great, I mean, I think it came to mind because of what Christine said and Mary said, I think, of just thinking about what impromptu networking asks you. Specifically, everybody is asked, and they're forced to reflect and say, what is it that I bring to this group that I'm going to contribute? So, and there's a Slack workspace where there are thousands of people all over the world that do this kind of thing. And it's just a rich, simple set of facilitation tools that kind of work because they're simple. You don't have to be a great facilitator.
Even better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When
Easy
you,
entry.
Yeah. When you put it in there, I was gonna call that out. That Tom, you should check out that website. There's a number of different activities, so it's not just that one. There's a whole bunch of them, but that's a great starting point for the, that we've got the mapping process, and then we've got the social processes that will help make the community, also will help support them being, more interactive, more connected, more sharing resources, the social, because you can make a map, and I've seen this, you can make a map and then still convene in a very old school way where one person's presenting and talking at everybody. And that doesn't actually work very well. And it's contradictory to the intent, to the philosophy of the map. And it actually just makes people be really cynical about social system mapping or about the map. So if your social processes aren't in alignment, gradually moving more and more in alignment, you run the risk of undermining the work you've done. So overlay structure is valuable. Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Tom, if there's one thing to focus on there, it would be the one called 1, 2, 4, all. That structure underlies 27 of the 33 liberating structures. So when we were first thinking about how to do liberating structures on Zoom, it was like, can we do 1, 2, 4, all? And we could do breakouts, which allows you to get to the 1, 2, and 4. But anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Super
Tom,
helpful.
Tom, do you have other, the rest of us are here all the time, so we can focus on whatever else is burning for you, or what other questions you have as you get started.
I don't really know yet, but I think it really is facilitation part. The people I'm working with, they're really open to these concepts, and so I think even what you just talked about, even how the meeting works, right? That they can just experience it. If they experience it, they're going to be able to replicate it. I know that, to be true. And so probably next month or so, I might have 1 or 2 of these meetings with, 5 or 6. I'm trying to limit it. Maybe, I don't even know if this is right. At least for the core people, the 5 or 6 people truly understand what this network is about. To at least get out a sense of, are they in agreement and aligned on what could happen here? And some of the questions that were just in that, Miro thing. Because that itself will be starting to cross boundaries. So, maybe then if I come up with my first draft of, here's the process I'm thinking of running through and the kind of questions, even to get some feedback on that would be really, really useful. So I don't know what I don't know yet, but I'd be
Cool.
willing to share what I'm trying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Insight, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Tom, what drew you to mapping? How did you find Kumu?
It's a
and
combination
stuff?
of a couple things. I like the data. I mean, I like the back end of it all, the data, and I can't wait to figure out how to make Kumu sing and be beautiful and all.
He's a techie geek guy.
Okay. Okay.
But at the same time, I do tremendous amount of consulting and working with these network structures and churches, and spent a lot of my leadership time. I mean, it's kind of thing, if you can be great at mapping, but if nobody uses it, it doesn't really matter. So most of my time is spent on leadership development with people in these networks to begin to see their job differently, what results look different. So I also enjoy that part, which is pulling out of them what they already know, then not making them do the translation to the mapping part. So I can make that translation on their behalf. So this probably started like 9 or 10 years ago when I was like doing one of these jobs. I saw that network mapping was probably what was needed to be able to help people see differently what was really going on. At that time, there were no tools, or certainly not in the church or religious world, not even close. So it's been, for me, it's been a 10-year journey. And I told Christine last week, finding what you guys have been doing and working on is, it's perfect. It's exactly what's needed. So I'm ready to go apply it and see what happens.
Great.
Real life stuff. So
Great.
Tom, 10 years ago, what was the relational questions you were asking or that were implied in the maps?
How is it that we can be different and be together? So I was working at a local church. I was doing very progressive stuff, and the mission of the church was moving forward, but it didn't look like what people were used to seeing. So therefore, there was resistance and all that. I just wanted people to be able to see that you can be on the same mission through different expressions and still be united. You didn't have to fit into any one expression to be part of the team, so to speak. And it was stuff that they'd already experienced when they were the rebels. It's funny when now that all the new rebels showed up, they didn't like them, you know. And it started just reading a lot of other more academic literature about what was going on, and it just felt like network science and all these things really hit upon how things really work, versus how we wish they work.
Were you actually drawing maps at that point?
Yeah, I actually have handwritten.
And because the question you just asked about how can we be different, still you be united in purpose and still bring our differences, seems like more of a question about the entity that the entity asks. And I'm wondering how, when you drew a line between two entities, what was that line? What did that mean?
Well, there's two different, there's entities and there's people, right?
Well, I meant people, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, yeah. So I kind of the line between people was the relational, the sociability sort of. Are they friends? Can they hang out together? Can they? Then the nodes themselves would be more like, are we trying to do the same things? So you can have friends and not actually be aligned with purpose. Or you can have purpose, they don't actually have to be friends, but can we at least see the difference? The sense being when you have both of those things are high, you have something that's really a change agent. But rather than just say you have to be this way or that way, just name what is and be able to see it. I think people were putting all sorts of assumptions on people's motives. I just was trying to make that clearer.
Mm-hmm.
So that was on the relational side. On the organizational side, there were some very practical things I wanted to show, but again, there was almost, I could draw it, but drawing it's just too static.
Mm-hmm.
Changes immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and also when they draw it, they become engaged in a way.
Yeah.
Then they're looking at something that's drawn for them.
Yeah, for sure. That's why the Sum App's a wonderful tool. But I think it's been 10 years even getting people to see this as a valid approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Much less the execution of it. But I would say in the last year, all of a sudden it's getting all sorts of traction. And part of it is in our space, a guy wrote this book called Network Power. So the concepts, that's a guy named David John Seal. And all of a sudden I started getting a lot of traction, but it's not practical. It's good theory. It's right.
Yeah.
So we've partnered up to write the application guide, which should be out next year. And I'm actually trying to do the real life people. So it's all very at the beginning, but that's okay. So
is that author in the religious community?
Yeah, he's I'd say 2-3 different communities: academic, big foundation guy, and religious. That's his. So he's at he loves to stay, what's he call it? He doesn't want to get too practical. I mean, he's kind of he's been practical and found out it's not his space. So he stays here. My job's to be in between, and then the practitioners. I'm in between him and the practitioners.
And
so I have the relationships.
And so this book that you're referring to, the follow-up book, is what you're working on with him.
Yes.
Yeah. And the core of it will be applying the network theory.
Correct, as it relates to societal change. So he makes, I mean, it's all the way, I mean, you have to know what you're trying to change, or none of it matters.
That's true.
Sometimes a hard thing to get at.
We just want it to be different. Anything is better than this, right? I mean, I'm being ironic, but
that's true. I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite books. Nobody likes it.
Nobody likes it. Is that what you said? It's your.
I don't like the title. It's like Trying Hard Isn't Good Enough.
Oh.
If you're in the government sector, you've probably heard about it. But man, we'd like to try hard and just stop. But I think more and more people say, no, we have to actually change something. We just can't keep trying hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sort of what's the impetus behind why now. Why are they willing to look at a different approach? And sometimes you can beat yourself on the head so long.
Yeah. Yep.
Christine, I wanted to ask you, with a client, the example you just gave on Miro, where are they in their process? You know, did this lead to more engagement, or is it too soon to tell?
It's hard for me to know. They had hired a person who, this is a cohort thing. So they have cohorts, and and the person I was working with was one of the fellows who had been through a cohort.
Oh, okay.
And they hired her to be the implementer of this process, which was great. But then she had a baby we had a contract period. So I'm now on retainer with them, but we haven't circled back to find out how it's like, what's changed. But the first round, so we did all this, we made the thing, we made the map, we launched the map, we did a few presentations to the community of the map, and people were really, they were a relatively systemic thinking group, and they were really psyched about getting to know people from because this cohort was like a 9-month program that was fairly intensive and fairly deep. And so they felt a really strong connection to their cohort, and they were psyched about getting connected to people from other cohorts. And they also had I remember them making jokes about how at the annual meeting, they were gonna, have a prize for the cohort that got the most people to fill in their connections and their profile. So they were sort of like turning it in, they were gamifying it, just sort of impromptu right there. They were saying, I know, let's do this, and I know, let's do that. So that was just the first people. So we had the ally team, and then we opened it up to anybody who was interested. And that group was pretty psyched about it. And unfortunately, the person I was working with, first she had a baby, and then she didn't come back. And so I don't have a contact who's paying close attention to it. And this happens all the time where, someone has time and energy for a while, and then they move on, and she hasn't been replaced. They wanted to replace her, but she hasn't been replaced, and starting from scratch with a new person hasn't been a topic of conversation. So, yeah. Thanks. But the process she implemented, I was really, because me, I just test things. I never I don't go 5 steps. I just sort of jump in and start doing things. And she was very, summarized and orderly, and sort of, double checked with everybody. Is this what I heard you say, Christine? And I'd be like, oh, wow, yeah, that's great. And then she'd take it to other people. And so she made a really nice, very thoughtful process of, moving from this step to that step. And she was very thoughtful about what do they know now, and what do they need to know, and what should we do here before we jump into there. So these frames were not all there. Like we started with 2 of the frame. I mean, the adding of frames was a sequence based on the overall arc of the process, which was very thoughtful. And I was just sharing this with another client last week, a new client who thinks a lot like that person, and thinking I should just take this, anonymize it, and then sort of spell out the steps she went through.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, because it was quite a wise sequence. But me, I have 20 things up in the air, and I have great ideas, and I just go, okay, add that to my list, and then I have more I have. I'm just going to sit and feel guilty about not having done so. If anybody would like to help me document that, I'd be happy to talk through it and give feedback. But anyway, I'm just saying.
It sounds like a good collective project or whatever. I'm glad you dug up your, I couldn't find your survey design thing a few months ago when I was looking for it.
Oh yeah, it is still in Google, and I do still have a link to it, but I plunked it in here, and I add a couple more things based on the comments in the Google Doc. So
great.
You can use this, and Kara can use that text for the drip that she's been pestering me to finish. Jim, you look like you're.
I was just thinking, Tom, whether or not, so that 10 years ago, the question you asked was friendship, person to person, yeah, who has a connection with somebody, sort of general. And it seems like the thing that that I've been getting out of this whole last couple of years with Christine and this community is, what are the relationship qualities and quantities? You know, who's connected to who, but in what way? Shifts the frame for me from like, who are we as a group, to what are the relational byways and highways that we have? Is it trust? Is it acquaintance? Is it generative interaction? Is it more complicated than that? You know, what do we need to know about that? And that, why am I asking all these questions about the relationship? Ultimately comes back to, what is my theory of change about what do I think? And this also comes from Christine. What do I think the relationships need to be to get the changes that we want to see in the community? So having that conversation with those influencers, that core group of people that you have, is probably a really rich conversation. There's no map involved, although a map stimulates the thinking. And it's, again, chicken and egg. If you've got a demo map and you've got some initial relationship questions, you look at that and then you go, are those the right questions? What are we trying to do here? You know, what is the change that we want to enable? And what's our theory about the kinds of relationships that will enable that? You know, and it might be also questions about, what are the capacities that we need to have that will enable the change? I mean, they're both interrelated, or they both have value, but boy, having that conversation, you know, you start to get to another layer of like, what are we trying to do here about purpose?
I think that's the conversation I want to have and expect to have. And I think, I don't even envision this session there even being a map there. I mean, they've seen what it can be, but my whole thing is, that doesn't matter what theirs is. We got to build ours. And I think they would love to have those sort of conversations. You know, I go back and build a map, you know, and they have to seed it first, or right, even be able to see their own. They could set their own parameter. Here's what it looks like. Then they can evaluate themselves to it. They might be like, oh, okay, we got work to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't even envision, other than, hey, one day you'll have this, but here's the, it's not going to matter if I agree with you, if we don't get to stuff like that. But I love that question. That's a good one.
And one thing I just wanted to say earlier was to don't get to a point, and don't lead other people to think that they're going to get to a point where this is done, and don't stop pushing the edges. So if the edges are, you know, you've got what the core group thinks is important, then continue to ask the kinds of questions like, who's potentially should be visible and isn't visible. So be pushing the edges of the periphery of the network, be pushing the edges of the kinds of questions you're asking, pushing the edges of the ways you're convening. I mean, just like, if you ever say, if we get to, okay, these are the right questions and this is the way it should be, and this is our map, what you're going to do is eventually you're going to invite it to stagnate and die, because the pushing is part of the process, I think. And part of the making, like this change that we're looking for.
Right.
We need to keep pushing on it, because we don't really know what it is yet. I mean, we have our ideas about it, but once we get into practicing it, then
a whole other set of questions.
Yeah.
So does it make sense sometimes to take some of the key questions they answer? I mean, you can integrate them into the questions for the network. Maybe every time you find out the people in the network don't have the same perspective you have.
Right.
Which in itself would be learning.
Yep.
Right.
Right. And so like one of the ways you can do that is to say, okay, this is what we have, but identify maybe a one or two or three, just like a small, peripheral people or people who might be looking at it differently, and say, here's what we've got. What feels like it's missing to you, or why don't you engage with it, or what's what's wrong with this, or what aspects of you aren't possible to be visible here, or, you know, like just do some inquiry around what exists, you know, like push to the edges and inquire into what you've made so far. And that those are the places where you can find out what else, you know, what are the edges that could be incorporated. And then maybe you discover that, oh my God, there's this big landmine. And you don't get to just say, I'm going to add this landmine, but then you need to have a conversation between the person who dropped the landmine on you and the people who have a thing, and say, how can we, you know, what does this mean? How does this impact us? But just, you know, endless inquiry, endless conversations, dialogue to shift it, to help people think across those differences, because that's where we get the most richness.
Yeah. Well, as you said, we're trying to move from a mechanistic world to emerging.
That's how nature does it.
I know.
Keep cycling through everything at every level. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything before I've got to jump off in a minute. Thank you all. Tom, how was this for you?
Great. Thank you so much. I look forward to participating.
Good.
I hope contributing and
good. That'd be great. I hope this helped you think about your next steps more.
That's great. Yes.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for bringing your real world here.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Do that.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Kara.